And a composer is the person who writes the music. Think about the differences here between a composer and a conductor. A composer, as I just said, is the person who writes the music. A conductor is the person that stands in front of the instrumental group or the choir or whatever, whatever their music they're conducting. They're the person with the baton that stands up in front, and they're helping relay the message that the composer is trying to tell in their music. So back to the composer, if you look at this right here on the screen, this is the type of stuff you would see a composer do. This in particular is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, a part of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And as you can see, you see the music notation here on the board. All right, this is what a composer does. They write this stuff out and they put it on to the musical staff. And then anybody that knows how to play the instruments plays it and performs it, and people enjoy it. So this is what a composer does. This gives you a more overarching overview of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You see all these various different markings. Other than the music notation, you see all these various different markings that helps add that flavor. It adds that little extra life to the piece of music, to give it its flavor, its texture, and all that fun music terminology stuff. And over here you see all of the various different instruments that are being played for this particular symphony. So orchestration, just to this kind of takes us into that. With orchestration, we go back to that score, you've seen all those instruments there. I talked about the composer adding that flavor, adding that texture, painting that scene in your head. And this right here is art. Music is a form of art. And, right here in art, you just get to see Bob Ross here painting the picture. In music, we're doing it with our instruments, and the composer is doing it with the various different markings within that music. Orchestration is an important part of composition. It's a very important part of composition. Without orchestration, we wouldn't have that flavor that I was just talking about. And composers, talking about the orchestra, we mentioned talking about the orchestra, they have 4 different families to work with. They have the brass family, the woodwinds family, the strings family, and the percussion family. Some of you may have learned about those particular families when you were younger, but we're going to give you an extra, helping of information in regards to the families of the orchestra. Not specifically, all this week, but as we go on in the semester, you'll get to learn more about them. So, orchestration decisions. What you need to, and things you need to figure out. If you want a sound that sounds like a bird, you're going to think about what instruments you have to work with. In your orchestra, you do have a flute, and you generally have a tuba. It depends on the orchestra that you're working with. So you want to decide which instrument would sound more like a bird. In this case, of course, it would be the flute, because tuba has that low pitched sound, right? So that's not going to be a bird. All right, and then you might need an elephant sound somewhere. Okay, so in this case, an elephant, that's going to be your low pitched sound, right? So then in that case, you would probably end up using a tuba. Another one that you could probably use that's not listed on there would be a trombone, of course, right? But you're going to be looking for that lower pitched sound. And a flute, of course, does not play those lower pitched sounds that would, um, you know, be something like an elephant. And then, you might think, I want something that sounds like maybe a king, you know, and you could always think about the trumpet. A trumpet would sound like a king, entering, a castle or something, or coming into a meeting or whatever, with the rest of the royalty. Think about the trumpet when you are, doing this, thinking about a king. But this right here in general, as I said, think about the different instrument sounds. You might have to even look up the instrument sounds, to give yourself an idea of what they each sound like. So musical parameters, we're just going to touch on these briefly here. Some important ones. You have dynamics, articulation, and tempo. Dynamics, how loud. The articulation, how crisp a sound is. And the tempo tells you how fast a sound is going to be. Okay, so that's just, we're just touching on those a little bit this week. So make sure you know those. They are going to show up as we go on. This is a diagram of different types of dynamics that you could run into. You want to make sure you're using words like quiet, soft, loud, not high and low, but quiet, soft, loud. Those are volume words. High and low are not. Articulation, how crisp a note is played. Right here it gives you different articulation types of words: staccato, legato, and tenuto. All right, so if you want to think about this here, T, 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 and right here, it's just kind of going from note to note. All right, and then this one, is basically do, 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 and so forth. Those weren't the exact pitches or anything like that, but I wanted to give you an example of the type of sound you would run into. All right, this staccato is your short and detached. Legato is smooth and flowing between notes. And lastly, this one is just held for the full value of the note, or it could be a little bit more. Not too much more, though. Tempo, all your, this is not all of them, but this is a this is just a diagram of some of your different tempo notes. It gives you an idea of, how fast or slow a song will be going. So who controls the parameters? Musical parameters have general guidelines, but ultimately it is up to the conductor to figure out how he wants an orchestra to perform his music. All right, it's his idea. It's his musical idea. He's the guy who is setting the scene. He's the guy who's painting that picture. All right, he sets the musical parameters for musicians. And professional orchestras have very talented players, and it is up to the conductor to help convey that message and get them to play the specific version of the music that is inside of his head. So, conductor, he's the one that is painting the picture. Lastly, we're going to talk about musicology. All right, we're going to talk about musicology. Essentially, essentially, it's a pretty straightforward concept. What's the difference between Taylor Swift and Metallica? Okay, think about that. What is the difference between both of them? And essentially, one, does pop music, right? And the other one does heavy metal, right? Hey, musicologist. Now there you go. There you go. That is essentially, you're doing what musicologists do. All right, what a musicologist does. All right. Congratulations. Okay, musicology, the historical and scientific study of music. That is what musicology is. All right, there are four main branches. You got historical musicology, ethnomusicology, systematic musicology, and music theory. And of course, historical musicology. This is the study of how music has changed over time. How, back a long time ago, we didn't use, back in like the Baroque period, and before that, we didn't really use much in the way of dynamic changes and tempo changes because that was taboo. No one wanted to do that. No, they weren't allowed to do that. But over time, things change. We add instruments. We add, different ways to change the music. And, typically this would apply to Western music, which, our music, music of England, that's the Western music that we're talking about, Europe. Ethnomusicology. It's a long name, funny music, and really it means to study music in the context of its culture. Music in Africa is very different than music in Indonesia, but they both represent something that could be similar or different. So, as I just said, they could be different styles of music, but, they could be representing something within their culture that's similar or the same. It could be used both of them could be used for dancing, within their culture, but they might have different sounds. They're probably going to be dancing differently, but they both still are used for dancing. One could, they both could be used for, party settings. Different sounds, but they still can be used for some type of party, some type of banquet, anything like that. That's how you kind of explain it. Music theory tells us how everything works in music. The branch of music looks at the logic behind how music is written. It can also mean the study of music notation, which, at the beginning, you got to see some music notation when we were talking a little bit about orchestration. But that's what music theory talks about. We're really going to dive into music theory later on in this class. But that's what music theory is all about. The nuts and bolts, how it's broken down, how it's written, how it's put together to make what you hear on the radio. And systematic musicology is the study of music from either a scientific or philosophical perspective. Music cognition looks at how the brain reacts to sounds, and music aesthetics looks at what makes something beautiful or not, like why NSYNC is better than One Direction. That's opinionated, but it could be why one is worse than the other. That's what that looks at. And acoustics, music sociology, and music education are also included in systematic musicology in that whole study.